Alright, it's the end of the season. We're not getting any more crafted weapons, and Final Shape was supposed to launch 2 days ago, so we're gonna start looking at crafted weapons that you should be bringing into Final Shape. This list isn't going to be looking at just the good things. I'm going to be examining every single crafted weapon and organizing them into 4 tiers. Tier 1 being the weapons that are mandatory, the weapons that you must get before the Final Shape launches because they are that good or are going to be that good. And Tier 4 are the weapons that I would genuinely question why anybody even uses them or has them in their inventory. So, here we go. Starting off with the tier 4 weapons, these are the crafted items that are either genuinely bad, do not have a good perk pool, or have options that are easier to get in other places, more readily available, and are just better. These are weapons that I would say that you should not even be using because there are just better options everywhere. I'm going to be naming the entire tier 4 category right now to not waste time because these weapons are not worth going into why they are bad. Just know that there are better options, both craftable and farmable. This is a no-brainer. There are no exceptions to this rule on this list. Tier 4 goes as follows. For the primary weapons, Perpetualis, Felteradiddle, Tripwire Canary, Raconteur, Tyranny of Heaven, Lethophobia, Word of Crota, Optative, Adorative, Pointed Inquiry, Tears of Contrition, Imperative, Rapacious Appetite, and Subjunctive. For the special weapons, Midas Reckoning, No Reprieve Until Its Return, Supercluster, Father's Sins, Distant Pull, and Locus Locutus. And for the heavy weapons, Tarnation, Sails by Pitch Glass, Plank Stride, Quillam's Terminus, Eletic Principle, Red Herring, Palmyra B, Seminotician, and Thin Precipice. These crafted weapons, I would say, are the ones that are genuinely not worth wasting your time crafting or even using. Yes, collect them, get the pattern, do that what you may, even try them out. But if you are using these items seriously, you need to reconsider changing them with any better option for your loadout. Moving on to the tier 3 weapons, these are the ones that are just marginally better than tier 4. The real distinction between tier 3 and tier 4 are that tier 3 weapons are the ones that you might consider using above the tier 4 counterparts. These are all measurably better than the tier 4 weapons for their respective weapon classes and weapon archetypes, and they go as follows. For the primary weapons, Come to Pass, Firefright, Age-Old Bond, Under Your Skin, Posterity, Ikelos Hand Cannon, Targeted Redaction, Nation of Beasts, Kept Confidence, Insidious, Syncopation, Smite of Moraine, Different Times, Oversoul Edict, Doom of Chelchis, Tarnished Metal, Bria's Love, Fang of Iryut, Imperial Evidence, Blood Feud, and Forensic Nightmare. For the special weapons, Likely Suspect, the Epicurean, Royal Executioner, Techian Force, the Eremite, the Enigma, Judgment of Kelgarath, Without Remorse, Thoughtless, Ikelos Sniper Rifle, and Volta Bracket. And for heavy weapons, Dimensional Hypertrochoid, Fire and Forget, Briar's Contempt, Doomed Petitioner, Recurrent Impact, Bump in the Night, Gold Tusk, Death's Razor, and Bequest. A couple things to note for this tier 3 category starts with this. The Under Your Skin bow I rate in tier 3 rather than in tier 4 because it does something unique that the other legendary craftable bows doesn't do. It has the perk origin trait Land Tank that grants you resilience and damage resist against PvE opponents for 5 seconds. This stacks up to 30 extra resilience and 15% extra damage resist on top of whatever you're doing. All of the Season 16 Psyops Battlegrounds weapons share these traits. The Land Tank origin trait just immediately puts weapons on top of others for their PvE components. Despite this bow not having any other notable perks, for the sheer fact that it has a land tank, it's going to be better than every other bow. Plus, it also just feels a little bit smoother when you're using it in-game compared to the rest. That is a completely subjective take, but I've used this bow the most compared to all of the others that are craftable.
Another gun to know, Ikelos Hand Cannon is in tier 3, whereas Word of Crota is in tier 4, because Ikelos Hand Cannon is simply better at doing the job of what a 180 does, partially because Seraph rounds exist. On top of that, this is going to be subjective again, but I feel that the sight picture for Ikelos Hand Cannon is much better than that of Word of Crota, just because Word of Crota, there's those crystals that add to the clutter of that version of the gun. Besides that, I have nothing more to point out apart from the fact that tier 3 weapons are just better in my eyes than the tier 4 weapons. If you're going to consider using a tier 4 weapon, just use a tier 3 weapon if you want to craft something. They're better for you to use, they're going to play better in the long run, and your fire team isn't going to hate you if they see you pulling up to the club with Come to Pass likely suspect and Bequest, for example, in the same way that they would hate you if they saw you pulling up with the Word of Crota, Midas Reckoning, and Kulm's Terminus.
I'm going to take a little bit more time talking about what I think are the better of the tier 2 craftable weapons. This is when you start to really get to the cream, but it isn't the cream of the crop. This is just that cream that sits on top that you have to filter out one more time before it starts to get really good. Starting off with the primary tier 2 weapons, Abyss Defiant, Sweet Sorrow, Round Robin, Peace of Mind, BXR-55 Battler, Disparity, Philotactic Spiral, Chattering Bone, Scalar Potential, Trustee, Transfiguration, Drang, Brigand's Law, Mikkel Reverence, and Submission. For the special weapons, we have Deliverance, Iterative Loop, Edge of Action, Edge of Intent, Nezarask Whisper, Pardon Our Dust, Ragnhild D, Wastelander, Nessa's Obligation, Beloved, Hollow Denial, Retrace Path, Path of Least Resistance, Akazia's Dejection, and Appetence. Pointing out quickly, that is all of the craftable trace rifles. All of the craftable trace rifles are on their own level. They're not better than each other. They all just do slightly different things and have slightly different purposes depending on the endgame build that you're trying to do. Trace rifles in and of themselves aren't in the best state in the meta right now. In the craftable ones specifically, they aren't the best, but they aren't bad either. They're just there. So if you're going to pick one, there really isn't one craftable that is much better than any other. There is a good legendary trace rifle in Sizer, but that's from the Trials of Osiris, and not everybody can get that. Not only that, but it's the only strand trace rifle at the moment. The other trace rifles really don't have the same purpose, considering you have to waste your energy slot to use them. You can use them, but in my opinion, really there's no real reason to do that if you can use Incisor. Now, moving back to the primary weapons, when you're looking at something like Abyss Defiant being ranked in tier 2 rather than tier 1, you'll see soon as to why. This thing has a solid perk pool. You can roll Reconstruction Outlaw. If you want to be funny, you can use Heal Clip or Enlightened Action for perk 3. You can get good damage perks, Target Lock, Kill Clip, even Incandescent. Not really a damage perk, but it has its utility, and it has the Sword Logic perk that is currently unique to the Crota's end weapons. Not only that, it has a solid origin trait. It's just a good all-around auto rifle, but there is one craftable auto rifle that still is better than Abyss Defiant, and we'll get into that when we talk about the tier 1 weapons, but this thing isn't bad at all. Moving on to the Sweet Sorrow, this is currently one of the best 720 RPM bullet hoses that we have in the game. Currently, there's no other good competition besides maybe Eidon Ally, but why are you using Eidon Ally when Necrochasm exists, and even at that, not particularly good weapons in the current meta. But Sweet Sorrow, it's more of a PvE weapon than it is a Crucible weapon, and its perks do fit that. Stats for all for one, if you really want to get funny like that. It has Vorpal Weapon, Demolitionist, and perk 4, Turnabout, if you really want to use Turnabout, but it's good for the fact that it can get a massive magazine, it's a bullet hose, it's arc, it goes good with some really good arc builds. You have the Land Tank origin trait. I already discussed how good it was, giving you the resilience and the damage resist. This one back in the day is a little bit better than it was now, but now there is one better craftable auto rifle than Sweet Sorrow. We'll get to that in a minute, but that's just where we are with Sweet Sorrow. It's good for its job.
Round Robin is a fantastic hand cannon, and it's unique because it is the only strand 120 in the entire game. It's not the best 120 in the entire game. Its base stats are a little bit lower than Igneous Hammer, which is currently the best 120 in the entire game, but it does get some interesting perks, rolling a strand 120 with Keep Away Kill Clip, something that you're not going to see Keep Away Kill Clip being put on any other 120 to the best of my knowledge. You can even use Harmony if you want to get really funny, but Kill Clip is just a little bit of a damage buff. You also have Golden Tricorn available in perk 4 for damage perks. There's some additional utility that it does have. I know some people like to run Killing Wind, Kill Clip, if you're playing a little bit more aggressive, just being able to get the 5 seconds of additional damage plus the mobility and handling and range from Killing Wind. It's a solid hand cannon round robin. It's not the best. Its origin tray is a little bit finicky. The Tracer Rocket sometimes hit, doesn't hit sometimes. If it had better tracking, I think round robin would be one of the best hand cannons in the entire game, but this thing is definitely worth a craft. Most of the craftable legendary pulse rifles are just good. We have Peace of Mind, the BXR-55 Battler, Disparity, Phylotactic Spiral, Chattering Bone, and Scalar Potential. These pulse rifles are good. They all have a role, they fill their role perfectly, and it really is just give or take which one you like using the most. I much prefer using the BXR Battler in PvE, where something like the Peace of Mind or Chattering Bone I much prefer to use in Crucible. The Scalar Potential is a bit new. It has way higher usage rates than anything else in Crucible right now. The Phylotactic Spiral, the Neo Muna pulse rifle, that thing has the potential to be goated. However, it does have a little bit of issues working with it. It has a great perk pool, but gun feel matters when we're dealing with this, and gun feel for the Phylotactic Spiral, it just doesn't feel very good. Otherwise, I would be rating this in the tier 1 of the craftable weapons, but that's just personal preference. This thing can get some amazing rolls. Keep Away Kill Clip, Tunnel Vision Frenzy, or even using something like Head Seeker if you want to use that. Elemental Capacitor makes the gun feel a lot better, but in my opinion, since Elemental Capacitor rolls in perk slot 4, it just is a little bit of a waste of time. I much prefer to use this thing with something like Kill Clip and Tunnel Vision. It synergizes very well. The little bit of extra stats from Keep Away aren't the most useful considering how close range the game is currently played, and 15 meters is a deceptively short distance for Keep Away to be active on, but that's just how I feel with this. Besides that, in this category we have Drang, but with Drang, if you can get a good heliocentric, I would say use that over Drang. It's just a little bit better. Brigand's Law is a very unique sidearm in my opinion. There's some good PvE rolls you can get on that, especially considering that it is a good user of Volt Shot. It just feels very good in my opinion to use Brigand's Law, despite it being a Pirate Season weapon. There's nothing wrong with Mikkel's Reverence for a sidearm. It's just a 3-round burst. It's not my cup of tea, but it rolls with good perks, and it has the Harmonizer origin trait that lets you use multiple of that type of harmonic resonance weapon and get many bonuses from those. And then we have the Submission, the Ruvau the Disciple SMG. This thing is goated. However, there are better SMGs in its place, most notably Unending Tempest and Immortal. This thing should be good. It was really good as a workhorse SMG, but there are just better options now. It's still good. If you don't have a better Unending Tempest or Immortal, you can use Submission very easily. I don't have very much to say for the special weapons. All I can say, Edge of Action, Edge of Intent, the exotic glaives for the Titan and Warlock, these are okay. They're not very usable in the current meta, but there are times when they shine, specifically the Titan bubble version of the glaive being able to nuke Gambit bosses. Regnen is a good grenade launcher. I think there are marginally better options, but a good Regnen is better than using a bad Cataphract or a Wendigo for that matter. It's just a solid grenade launcher. I don't know how much better it's going to be. This particular archetype isn't getting touched in the March 5th balance patch, so I would have the pattern at least, but if you can get a good cataphract, then I really wouldn't even be using this. But it's still a great great grenade launcher.
Now we're moving on to the tier 1 category, and I'm going to spend a significant amount of time with each and every single one of these weapons, telling you what is the role, what isn't the role, and things that you should consider using on those. This is where the bulk of my effort went into when making this, was just looking at these tier 1 weapons, because in my opinion, these tier 1 craftable weapons are not marginal, miles better than every other craftable weapon on this list. And even if there's a category not filled by these tier 1 weapons, you can just go get a random drop in the world that's going to be better than all of the tier 3 and below, and even some of the tier 2 craftable options. Starting off with the Almond AR2, this is one of the, if not the best auto rifle in the game currently. This thing, despite it only being solar, does everything, and its perk pool does reflect that. In my opinion, the best role for the Almond that you can be using is going to be dynamic sway reduction and your choice of damage perk. I think Adrenaline Junkie is good because in PvE it's easy to chain grenade kills, but in PvP, One for All might be a little bit more of a consistent damage perk, but you still need to hit 3 people with it. It's much better in 6s. Having something like Incandescent or Adaptive Munitions makes this thing really good. You're not using this thing for the damage, you're using this thing for the consistency of it, and being able to craft high cal rounds or ricochet rounds in this thing either is going to turn this into a very high impact auto rifle, or it's going to be a discount hard light. I cannot say enough good things about Almond AR2. I know this thing traumatized the Crucible during the crafting event, but give it a use now. It is still good. It is one of the most used auto rifles that I encounter whenever I play Crucible. I have played a lot of Crucible this season after the crafting, so I think that Almond AR2 is that cream of the crop craftable auto rifle that we're looking about. And just looking at some of the most popular 3 and 4 combos, we have Dynamic Sway Incandescent, Triple Tap Incandescent. I don't know why Triple Tap would be popular, but if you want to be a funny, use Triple Tap. What you're sticking to, in my opinion, should be Adrenaline Junkie if you need a damage perk, and Incandescent if you need to do anything else with it, and One for All if you think you can get this thing to work in 6s. I don't think that it's worth considering. Pugilist and Gutshot Straight is just a really bad perk. Up next is the Rufus's Fury. Everything that Rufus does, Amit can't do. These things are as interchangeable as they get. You're either using the Amit or using the Rufus. If you need a primary auto rifle to go with your secondary special weapon, you're using Rufus. Or if you want to use something like Chaperone in the primary slot, you're using Amit in the secondary. This thing is crazy. Now, personally, my favorite role on this thing is using Demolitionist plus Target Lock. It's not the best in the world. Some would say Reconstruction, and yes, this thing is pretty funny being a 720. It's a better bullet hose than Sweet Sorrow, but this thing is just better for Crucible, where Sweet Sorrow is better for PvE situations. There is nothing wrong with Rufus in my opinion. This thing is great. If you can control the recoil for the Rufus, I would use this as a mainstay auto rifle, considering how easy it is to use, especially considering that you have Frenzy and Target Lock as damage perks. You're also being able to get Harmony and Adrenaline Junkie. I rate Adrenaline Junkie very highly, especially on a gun that has Demolitionist. I like using Adrenaline Junkie, Demolitionist on the same gun. You're being able to roll with Ricochet rounds, high cal, and also armor piercing, even though I do think that high cal rounds is going to be better for a gun of this type. Apart from that, rewind rounds is funny. I like moving target, even though I personally wouldn't craft a moving target onto a Rufus's Fury. I would stick to either Reconstruction or Demolitionist for that, and, you know, Perpetual Motion Thresh, but what's Thresh?
I wouldn't use Thresh. Looking at some of the most popular roles on this database: Reconstruction, Target Lock, Demolition is Hatchling. I didn't even mention Hatchling because I was talking about this in a purely Crucible perspective, but Hatchling is going to be good, even though Threadlings are getting a major nerf on March 5th whenever the Crucible Balance patch does go live. I still think Hatchling will be an okay thing to do, but if you need damage, Target Lock, Frenzy, Adrenaline Junkie, stick with those if you can.
I include Wishkeeper in tier 1 category because it is a craftable bow, and it is a good craftable. Is that, don't get me wrong, it is niche and its purposes are niche, but this bow is still good, especially if you can get its catalyst running. I prefer to use Enduring Snare Refit. Some would say multi-threaded snare refit, but I would just stay away from Vorpal and Hatchling. If you're using this, really either choose between Enduring or multi-threaded. If you're doing Crucible, I would say use Enduring Snare Rift. If you're doing any other activity with a high enemy density, maybe multi-threaded snare refit because it's easier to hit at that point. But once you get this thing with the Snare Reaver 4 and you have full access to everything in this category, Wishkeeper is just a solid bow option. Now, I'm personally not using this for anything besides funny builds in Crucible, funny strain builds in Crucible, getting those easy one-shots off on people who don't expect it, but it's still a good craftable bow and better than all of the other craftable bows. It eclipses by far every single craftable bow in the game currently. Moving on to the Austringer, this thing is too disrespected, and it is disrespected because there are better 140s, but you cannot disrespect the OGs. Austringer is the best craftable PvP hand cannon in the entire game. Nothing comes even close to being able to beat Austringer in terms of that craftable category. Its perks are really, really good. It has Rangefinder in slot 4. Rangefinder isn't that good anymore. It doesn't have Keep Away, so if you're running Austringer in Crucible, you're really running it with either an Outlaw opening shot roll or an Eye of the Storm rangefinder roll. Like I said, I don't really rate rangefinder highly anymore, but you can get Rampage on this, you can get Frenzy on this if you want to use Eye of the Storm. Snapshot is always good. Snapshot on hand cannons, some would argue the usefulness of it. I am one of those people who would argue that Snapshot on hand cannons isn't really that useful. You can get Zen Moment. Zen Moment isn't a popular perk, but it is still a perk you can get on this. Good barrels, good magazine perks. Again, being able to get the high cal armor piercing. Pretty much every single gun that gets a magazine perk can roll high cal ricochet armor piercing, so that isn't something to be worried about when you're going over these weapons. Just know that its perk columns 3 and 4 are going to be best in category. Outlaw Rampage makes this thing feels like the old Callus hand cannon from back in the day. I cannot remember what it is called for the life of me. The Midnight Coup, just actually looking this up, it shares the same archetype. It feels a lot like the Midnight Coup, the Austringer. I mean, it makes sense. It is a Callus weapon. Currently, the Midnight Coup, came from the Callus raid. So if you want to use that, the Outlaw Rampage roll, you're going to have a great time. It's going to feel good while using it. Up next is Zaouli's Bane. Yes, before you turn off the video, I'm ranking this as a tier 1 craftable weapon. Why? Because it does things that other hand cannons don't. Let me explain. If you're using this thing in Crucible, this thing is garbage. It is irredeemable. If you're using this in Crucible and you're on my team, I'm going to report you for cheating. I'm going to report you for harassment. I'm going to report you for whatever the game will allow me to report you for, just because you're using Zaouli's Bane in Crucible. However, in PvE, every other activity, this is one of the best hand cannons that you can use if you don't want to use Sunshot. Let me explain. This thing serves the same exact solar role that Sunshot does. Primarily, you're using this thing with explosive payload and incandescent. As you can see, 3 and 4, explosive payload and incandescent. You can also roll Firefly explosive payload on this thing, but the best roll for this by far is explosive payload incandescent on a solar hand cannon that isn't Sunshot, and because of that, this is going to be rated so highly.
endgame PvE activities, if you want to solo flawless or do dungeons or master mode anything, this hand cannon is phenomenal if you're running solar and you need that little bit of extra range that you can't get with your other solar hand cannon. I recommend using this, even trying it out. Zoe's Bane is a fantastic option. I feel that I don't even need to explain why I'm ranking Revision 0 in Tier 1. This thing is one of the best pulse rifles in the entire game. My preferred role on this thing is to use armor-piercing rounds in either Vorpal Weapon or Moving Target. I don't think that any of the other perks in Column 3 are very good, and for the quote-unquote catalyst, I really like to use Outlaw. Some would say 4-timer refit, but some issues on that have been fixed where you can no longer get 6 shots or 8 shots with the Hunter's Trance because the 4th times the charm, 4th time refit got fixed, that your shots don't carry over into Hunter's Trance, if that makes any sense. Used to be able to get a lot of shots with Hunter's Trance for using 4 times the charm, is all I will say. This thing is fantastic. Use it, don't use it, but it's one of the best craftable pulse rifles, and I'm not going to waste my breath explaining why Dead Man's Tale is a Tier 1 craftable weapon. If you played against this thing or used this thing at all in the past 3 years, I think you understand exactly why this thing used to be broken and why it is still the best scout rifle to use in Crucible and one of the upper echelon scout rifles to use in endgame PvE activities. My favorite role to use on this thing is to use High Cal, and then in Column 1 I use Vorpal Weapon. Some would say Outlaw. I think this thing reloads quick enough. Some say 4 times the charm. I think 4 times the charm is less useful now than it used to be because of the rework to its intrinsic, where it's going to grant you bonus hip fire with the catalyst, the Dark Force trigger. So I prefer to use Vorpal Weapon, just having that little bit of extra damage against bosses and especially Guardians and their super. This thing chews through them. Callus Mini Tool is the best SMG in the entire game. There I say, if you're using an SMG that isn't Callus Mini Tool, I question you for PvE and PvP. I say, okay, we can have that argument, but in PvE, this thing rolling with Unrelenting and Incandescent, use this on any solar build. If you need to do any endgame activity and you can use Callus Mini Tool as your primary add clear weapon, or your primary weapon if you want to say it that way, use it. This thing is absolutely crazy. Even using it with something like Threat Detector Incandescent or Moving Target Incandescent. Some people use Grave Robber. I'm not a fan of it, but Incandescent in the 4th category, this thing is very good for a reason. I don't think Feeding Frenzy is necessary. I don't think Eye the Storm is necessary. I don't think Tap the Trigger is necessary. Just use Incandescent on this thing if you're playing PvE. You will thank me later. Unrelenting Incandescent single-handedly will carry you through dungeons on any difficulty, will let you solo flawless content easier than you've ever been able to solo in your life, and it synergizes perfectly with Solar 3.0. Craft the Callus Mini Tool if you can, and if you can't, go get it. The iClose SMG V1.0.3 specifically, because you can't get the 1.0.2 anymore. Normally I would say the 1.0.2 is better than the SMG 1.0.3, but the 1.0.3 is the one that you can actually craft. For simple sakes, I'm just going to call it iClose SMG 3. I'm not going to say all that anymore. My favorite role to use on this thing is using Feeding Frenzy plus Volt Shot in PvE. And if I'm using this thing in Crucible, I'm either running Killing When Rangefinder or Threat Detector Rangefinder. This thing is good for a couple reasons, one of them being Seraph rounds. Try using this thing in Crucible with Dynamic Sway Reduction, Tap the Trigger, and Seraph rounds, and you'll understand exactly what I mean by this thing is one of the smoothest Crucible SMGs in the entire game, especially because, like I said, you can't get version 2 anymore, and you can't get a roll with Demolitionist Subsistence anymore, so you're stuck with version 3. I would say Dynamic Sway Reduction, Tap the Trigger is going to be great for Crucible. Rangefinder got changed a little bit, but for PvE, Volt Shot, Feeding Frenzy, I sound like a broken record. This thing is a great SMG. It is a little bit worse than Callus Mini Tool in my opinion, but it is still well worth the slot if you can make the build work. Moving on to the special weapons that are tier 1, I feel like I shouldn't need to explain why Scatter Signal, the new legendary kinetic fusion rifle from Season of the Wish, is going to be on this list, but I'll explain anyway. The role I most prefer to use with this thing is going to be Overflow and Controlled Burst. Controlled Burst currently, there's no reason to craft it Adept to do the upgraded version of Controlled Burst. It currently does nothing. The word for that is completely slipping my mind. Enhanced Controlled Burst, there's no reason to do that anymore. So Overflow Controlled Burst. I used to say Slice was a little bit better. Maybe Slice Controlled Burst is better on Hunters. That's how I would always use it. But being able to have the 16 or 18 shots in the magazine with Overflow and Controlled Burst, it is just so much damage. This thing carried me through Warlord's Ruin, Soul of Flawless. This thing is amazing. It is really good. It's going to let you do everything. It's a strand damage type. Strand is really strong in the meta right now. Not a lot of things with shields against it, and it does damage to everything else. It gets that special strand damage boost against enemies because it is a primary special weapon. You are in really, really good shape. Not only that, Dragon's Vengeance is a great origin perk. That's all I'll say. These Season of the Wish weapons have great... the Dragon's Vengeance is a great origin perk. Now talking about the only exotic glaive that I rate in tier 1, Edge of Concurrence. This thing is good specifically because of its use in Crucible and Gambit. Now this thing is funny. It is really, really funny to play the Momentum Hunter based gameplay, especially on Strand, being able to use a Lightning Sinker to get those crazy one-shots. This thing gets one-shots inside of bubbles. This thing gets one-shots inside of wells if you can hit them with the full damage plus the Lightning Strike from it. This thing in Gambit is my invasion machine. This thing is my best friend whenever I want to play Invader and Gambit. It is just really, really funny and really, really fun to use. The only downside of this, of course, is that you can only use it on Hunter, but those are just... Besides Edge of Concurrence, there is no other better craftable glaive than Lubrae's Ruin. This thing is very good. It is the best legendary glaive in the game, period. And being able to craft it is even better. The only downside of this glaive is that it constantly has those spinning effects and it is big, so it is a little bit distracting. This thing is very, very good. You have some good rolls on it where you can get something like Tilting at Windmills plus Unstoppable Force. Also, you can get Vorpal Weapon and Unrelenting on this. Whenever I'm using this thing to run any sort of Soul Flawless activity, I much prefer to use this with Grave Robber Wellspring. Wellspring is a great bailout perk if you're missing any real ability, recharge, ability energy, anything like that. I don't think Wellspring is rated highly enough as it stands, and it's a solar craftable glaive. Lubrae's Ruin is just the best craftable glaive, period. It's better than all of the others except for maybe Excalibur. This thing's only downside is that it's an exotic. It's currently the second most popular glaive in the entire game for good reasons. I shouldn't need to explain why Excalibur is good. It is good because its exotic perk is good and it does good things. There really isn't anything else to it. It's rolls that you can craft it with. They're very simple. I much prefer to use the immovable refit on this thing. Some like the robber refit. I don't know anybody who likes the feedback refit, but I like using the immovable refit on this thing, and it's just a good glaive. Literally, its only downside is that it's an exotic. Otherwise, I'd say that Lubrae's Ruin is the best, but this thing definitely is the best craftable glaive in the game. Speaking of best in the game, I'm going to sound like a broken record with this one. Forbearance, the legendary arc grenade launcher from Vow the Disciple. This thing is fantastic. There isn't a single better waveframe in the game than this. I know the new Vanguard Arc Waveframe grenade launcher is okay, but this thing is better, trust me. It's just so much better. It has better rolls, especially being able to get Ambitious Assassin and Bait and Switch. You can get One for All, Chain Reaction, Ambitious Assassin. That's the roll you see most people using. You can roll something funny like Genesis and Wellspring if you really want to, but use this thing with Ambitious Assassin and Chain Reaction and tell me that I'm wrong, that this thing isn't the best waveframe in the entire game. This thing is a primary ad clear without even having to use a primary weapon. Running double special with this thing was the meta for so long that it, in my opinion, single-handedly got the special ammo changes to happen.
Now moving on to Explosive Personality. This thing is a solar waveframe grenade launcher, and I like it. I don't like it as much as I like Forbearance, but it is great. My preferred role to use on this thing is something like Feeding Frenzy, One for All Frenzy. This thing is a grenade launcher that you're going to keep out and use, where Forbearance is a grenade launcher that you shoot and then put away, just because the way Ambitious Assassin works and not being able to clear things all the time, plus Land Tank as the origin trait, being able to get that maximum of 30 resilience and 50% damage resist while this thing is being used is just very good. Disruption Break also, I don't think you should be using that. You can also get auto-loading holster on this thing, which auto-loading holster and One for All is a really good perk combination. Moving on to yet another legendary craftable grenade launcher. This thing is my preferred PvP grenade launcher. Even though it isn't a popular role, I really like to run this thing with proximity grenades, turnabout, and demolitionist. I also run this thing with spike grenades, disruption break, threat detector. It's just a really solid grenade launcher. Proximity grenades makes this thing just absolutely brain dead, super easy to use. But if you want the one-hit potential, spike grenades is crazy. This thing was part of the reason why I was able to go flawless using just the Cerberus +1. A link to that video is going to show up on screen right now. I think this is a very good grenade launcher and is worth anybody using. On to another exotic cop-out, Dead Messenger. This thing is good because its exotic perk is good. It's a little bit less good than Forbearance, but it is still a great grenade launcher all in all. Use it, but if you need a waveframe grenade launcher, I would personally just say to use Forbearance or Explosive Personality, but this thing is good because it's an exotic and it just so happens to be craftable now. Imperial Decree is a phenomenal workhorse PvP shotgun. If you're running this thing, you are typically going to be running it with slide shot, opening shot, just for that extra range. This thing is a phenomenally consistent crucible shotgun if you need to run a shotgun in the kinetic slot. It's a little bit of a pain to get the pattern for these, but you can currently get them at the helm infinitely. Just get these. You really are just using your season of the Defiance engrams to roll the engram that contains this and the new Crown Splitter. So it's a little bit of a pain if you get unlucky, but this thing is well worth it. Like I said, slide shot, opening shot is the role you want to use on this thing in Crucible. There really is no reason to use it in PvE, but if you are going to, it does have Trench Barrel. Trench Barrel is the best PvE shotgun perk just for the fact that you can punch and shoot, basically. Pugilist Trench Barrel, it's a really good roll, and yeah, that's just a really solid and consistent shotgun. Speaking of solid and consistent shotguns, we have a Heritage right here. Heritage is my favorite kinetic shotgun. It's one of my favorite weapons in the game. It's one of my most used weapons in the game. In fact, I still use my original Heritage from Deepstone Crypt, the one that comes with Reconstruction and Killing Wind, but I could craft this now if I really wanted to. I just have chosen not to craft it just because I just like to use my original a little bit more. The only reason to craft this, if you don't have an original one, is just for getting the Bray Inheritance origin trait on it. Other than that, it's a slug shotgun. It's super clean. This thing is one of the best looking shotgun models in the game. The Deepstone Crypt weapons, despite not being the best, are
good looking. That's pretty much the most I can say about this. It really doesn't have any good damage perk. Focus Fury used to be really good in the double slug meta, but this thing doesn't need a damage perk because it's really good. If you're using auto loading holster, don't use that. You should probably just use Reconstruction, considering you're going to be getting a little bit more use out of that long run, but I'd recommend using Heritage if you need a kinetic slug shotgun. Better in PvE, but it is still very usable in Crucible, very consistent. Now, this is a little bit of a weird one, but iClose Shotgun version 3 is good, specifically because it can roll with both 1-2 punch and trench barrel, depending on what you're doing, using 1-2 punch to get those boss kills, or using trench barrel to do a little bit more sustained damage. I like this thing a little bit better using Pugilist and 1-2 punch, just because being able to get the bonus damage off of powered melee is going to be very good. It has a lot of pellets because it is a lightweight shotgun, the rapid fire shotgun I should say, so it is extremely consistent using this thing with 1-2 punch. It has an okay origin trait, you really don't get the most use out of it, and it has incandescent if you want to be funny. Apart from that, good shotgun. Give it a craft. It's a little bit finicky to use sometimes, but the endgame potential of iClose is better than most other shotguns. Don't try using this thing in Crucible, though, because it is a rapid fire with a very low range. You are going to wish that you never even equipped this thing if you want to bring this into Crucible. Everything that I said about iClose Shotgun version 3 applies to Swordbreaker. This thing might as well be the exact same shotgun, except that it is strand and kinetic. So it is arguably a little bit more useful because it keeps your secondary slot open for different weapons like... I can't think of any off the top of my head, but it's still a great shotgun. Everything I said about iClose applies to this. The only thing is it does get Trench Barrel, but to make up for that, it gets Sword Logic. Sword Logic is a great perk. You can run through all of your opponents. Cursed Thrall as an origin trait isn't particularly good and can get you killed sometimes, but using this thing with Threat Detector 1-2 punch or Elemental Capacitor 1-2 punch, really you're using this thing for 1-2 punch. You're not using it for anything else. Like I said, if you take this into PvP, you're going to be really sad. If you take this into PvE, you're going to be doing some of the most damage, some of the most single target damage that is currently capable, using some of the damage strategies like Titan 1-2 punching with Burning Fist. That is one of the best ways to kill bosses solo right now. Moving on to another tier 1 Deepstone Crypt weapon, we have Succession. Again, a phenomenal sniper rifle. This is one of the best endgame sniper rifles currently that occupies the kinetic slot. It's just very good. Rolls with Reconstruction, Vorpal Weapon. I think Reconstruction, Vorpal Weapon is going to be my favorite roll just because you're consistently getting very high damage. God forbid there ever is a champion modifier for sniper rifles. This thing never leaves my inventory whenever there is a champion modifier for sniper rifles, and even at that, this is my main sniper of choice in PvE. Not particularly good in Crucible, just because it has any issues with snipers. Its sight isn't the best for Crucible, but it's super clean in every other activity. If you want to use Recombination, do it. I don't like Recombination, even though it is one of those perks exclusive to the Deepstone Crypt weapons. Like I said, I much prefer using this thing with Reconstruction Vorpal Weapon. Firing Line, in theory, can get you a little bit more damage, but Vorpal is just consistent, especially if you're running this thing solo. Moving on to a Destiny 1 classic, the Supremacy. This thing not only is a very good Crucible sniper rifle, but it is a very good PvE sniper rifle. Like I said, one of the most popular in the entire game for PvE specifically because it can roll rewind rounds and bait and switch. It can also roll Vorpal Weapon and 4 times the charm in that perk 4. I see this thing being run very often with rewind rounds, 4 times the charm, and an extended magazine. You can get an almost comical amount of shots off with this thing on bosses if you can just consistently hit your headshots. It is almost crazy how much damage this thing is actually capable of once you consider it. It's almost as much damage as some heavy weapons do. Apart from that, for Crucible, you got snapshot sights, you got opening shot. That's pretty much it. The only things that I would even consider using, you could use Elemental Capacitor, but it's really only good if you're using it on an Arc subclass, but opening shot, snapshot sights, ricochet rounds. You can do some really funny things with this gun. It is a really, really good weapon. Farm it when Last Wish is available, or just use your free Last Wish bounty every week to get a Supremacy to be able to craft this. This is a weapon that you should consider bringing into Day 1 raid races. This is a weapon you should consider bringing into Master raids. This is one of those weapons that once Final Shape drops, it's probably not going to leave my inventory for the Day 1 raid. Moving on to the Tier 1 heavy weapons, we are going to start with the Caraxus Distress. This thing only has one issue. Its singular issue is that Cataphract GL3 from Trials of Osiris exists. However, if you cannot get a Cataphract GL3 with bait and switch, just use Caraxus Distress. It does everything that Cataphract does, just a little bit less damage. My preferred role to use on this thing is to use Reconstruction and Frenzy. Once proccing Frenzy and Reconstruction, you can get a criminal amount of shots off with this thing. Ambitious Assassin, if you have the ammo capacity available. I really wouldn't say Impulse Amplifier unless you're bringing this thing into Crucible, but then again, they're just better heavy weapons to use in Crucible. You can also use Harmony Reconstruction because you get the 20% damage bonus from Harmony for 7 seconds, but it's only good if you're ammo dumping. Frenzy you can keep active easier than you can keep Harmony active on this thing. Full Core is interesting, but there really isn't many enemies that stand far enough away to take full advantage of Full Core. Warlord's Ruin, the final boss, comes to mind. Blowing it up with Reconstruction Full Core, it's one of the best bakes in the game, but there really isn't many bosses that take full advantage of Full Core. Overall, good gun. Don't use Hatchling, don't use Wellspring, don't use Surrounded. The people that use these perks on this gun for perk 3, people that use Paracausal Affinity, just don't use it. Don't use it. Another Tier 1 heavy weapon, Cataclysmic. This is my favorite linear fusion rifle in the entire game, specifically because it rolls 4 times the charm bait and switch. This thing is capable of more damage than almost any other heavy weapon if you can use it in its correct capacity. When linear fusion rifles are good, this thing is crazy. This thing was broken for almost 2 years straight before it got its nerf in the middle of Lightfall. I believe the patch came out during Season of the Deep that brought the weapon choices closer into line, but Cataclysmic is still a phenomenal choice. Use this weapon, play Vow of the Disciple to get Cataclysmic. If you can't get it crafted, get it adept and use Big One spec on it, but if not, just get it crafted and use it with Reconstruction, 4 times the charm, bait and switch is the only role that you should even consider using. If you say Focused Fury, you're not going to be allowed in my Minecraft server anymore. Use 4 times the charm and bait and switch on this thing. That's why it is so good, and that's why it's a Tier 1 weapon. The best part about Taipan being a Tier 1 heavy weapon is that you get it for free. That is pretty much the only reason why it's a Tier 1, otherwise it would be in Tier 2. This thing is so easy to get and does everything that Cataclysmic does, just a tiny bit worse. What I mean by that is you're using triple tap and then either Firing Line, Frenzy, or Focused Fury, depending on what you're doing. If you're playing solo, I would tend to move towards Frenzy. If you're playing with a fire team, I would stray closer to Firing Line. That's pretty much it. Some say triple tap, some say clown cartridge. I think that clown cartridge is a little bit inconsistent on this gun, which is why I much prefer to use triple tap, but you get this gun for free at the end of the crafting quest. There really is no reason not to have one of these crafted. If solar or linear fusion rifles are good and you need a void option for a linear fusion rifle, use this. If not, just use Cataclysmic. Moving on to the machine guns, Tier 1 machine guns, fixed odds from the Duality Dungeon. This thing is one of the best craftable machine guns in the game. There are a lot of good craftable machine guns, we'll get to the other two, but starting off with this thing, this is our solar option. You have a couple different roles you can use on this, in my opinion. For column 3, I feel that you're always going to be wanting field prep, specifically for the increased inventory size. You don't have to waste any reserves on solar to use field prep. You could use one reserve and it'll get you max inventory, but then again, some say feeding frenzy. I like feeding frenzy, especially using feeding frenzy with incandescent. This thing is one of the best LMGs when you're doing solo Grandmaster Nightfalls on a solar subclass, but you also have access to Killing Tally. The only problem with Killing Tally is that you have no way to refill the magazine natively, which means Killing Tally is going to lose a little bit of effectiveness. Rampage could be a little bit better. I wouldn't use Firing Line. I wouldn't use Focus Fury. I wouldn't use Rangefinder if you're using this thing. Perk 3 or Column 3, you're using either Field Prep or Feeding Frenzy, and for Column 4, depending on what you're doing, you're either using Incandescent or Killing Tally. This thing, it's a good LMG, but there's one that's a little bit better. When I say a little better, I actually mean a lot better. Commemoration does everything that Fixed Odds does and just blows it out of the park. The only reason why Fixed Odds is in Tier 1 is because it is a phenomenal solar LMG, and there really isn't any other better option than Fixed Odds in that category. But for Commemoration, if you need a Void LMG or any LMG period, use this thing. I'll tell you why. Running this thing with the Reconstruction Killing Tally will allow you to use this as a primary weapon, especially on Void Hunters if you're using the exotic Gear Falcon's Hoibjerg. When I say that this thing has not left my inventory since I got it crafted, I mean that this has not left my inventory since I crafted this thing. I used it before during Deepstone Crypt, but as soon as Gear Falcon's Hoibjerg got added to the game, and as soon as this thing got a loot refresh, being able to craft them with the refresh of Deepstone Crypt, this thing just hasn't left my inventory. It is so freaking good, I cannot even begin to state how good this thing is. Like, I barely have the words to describe how good this thing is. I use it for literally everything. The damage boost you get from Killing Tally, especially considering that Reconstruction doesn't count as a reload. So if this thing is just out, you have a constant supply for Killing Tally. You don't have to reload it, so you're always pretty much going to be having that 30% increased damage. Do not even begin to come at me with, say, oh, Rampage is good, oh, Firing Line is good, oh, Redirection is good. No. Use Killing Tally, use Reconstruction. If you aren't using those, you're not invited to my Minecraft wedding. I'm telling you, this thing is so good. And for the people who on Light GG say that Rampage is better, please come out of hiding so I want to fight you. You're a coward. Use Killing Tally Reconstruction. I promise you, you will thank me later. Retrofit Escapade, another legendary craftable machine gun that is also void. However, this time it does it for a little bit different reasons. The only role I would even begin to consider using on this gun is 4 times the charm target lock. It just does a crazy amount of single target damage. It's good to nuke bosses, it's good to nuke majors, good to nuke champions. You could get a little bit of a better damage bonus from using Golden Tricorn if you get a powered grenade or powered melee kill. That's only for 10 seconds though. You could use Frenzy just for, 12 seconds of refreshable 15% increased damage, but once you get target lock 4 times the charm rockin', especially if you can figure out a way to get volatile rounds with Hunter by using Gear Falcon's Hoibjerg or using any other void fragment that gets you volatile rounds when picking up an Orb of Power, I don't remember the name for it, you're gonna have a really good time. Yeah, 4 times the charm target lock, that's the role you're gonna be using on this thing. Good gun. The only rocket launcher in Tier 1 is Apex Predator. Why? Because this thing rolls with Reconstruction and you can get either bipod or bait and switch. There's nothing else to say. Bipod Reconstruction, you can have 4 rockets. That's my preferred role using bipod Reconstruction, but Reconstruction bait and switch gives you way more damage, more efficient damage, and better damage rotations. I just prefer using bipod Reconstruction. I don't even look at any of the other perks. It has Column 3 Incandescent, but then again, it's a rocket launcher. You don't need Incandescent on it, especially in perk 3. This thing can roll with Frenzy. This thing can roll with Vorpal Weapon, but if you're using Vorpal Weapon, you might as well just use Explosive Light. I haven't mentioned Explosive Light because if you're using Explosive Light, you might as well just use Bait and Switch because it is as easy to get Bait and Switch working as it is to get Explosive Light working. I know Explosive Light, you just have to pick an orb, but Bait and Switch, that little bit of extra damage, Reconstruction Bait and Switch, I feel that it is just way better. This thing is a great rocket launcher. If you can't get the Supremacy, you already have it, and you don't know what else to get Apex Predator. Finally, for the final tier 1 heavy weapon, we have both the other half and half-truths. These things are effectively the same weapon because of the perk that you're going to be using on them. That perk is Eager Edge. You're always going to be using Eager Edge on this thing. If you're not using Eager Edge, I really don't know what you're doing. The good part, I think, that the other half is a little bit better, specifically because you are able to get Eager Edge in Column 3, and you can get something like Repulsor Brace, Frenzy, Whirlwind Braid, or Vorpal Weapon in Column 4, whereas on the Half-Truths, you're getting Eager Edge in Column 4, which means you're going to be getting Duelist Trance, Unrelenting, Relentless Strikes, and Tireless Braid. There is nothing wrong with your choice, really. In my opinion, it all just comes down to style points. I much prefer using the other half, but some people prefer using Half-Truths. I like it because it's purple. Some people like it because it's blue. You're not using this thing for damage. You're just using this thing as a traversal tool, and because these two are the only weapons in the entire game that have Eager Edge as a perk on them, they have no comparison, which makes them a tier 1 mandatory crafted weapon to have. If you don't have Eager Edge on a regular one of these, just get it on the crafted one, especially because you can get the enhanced version of Eager Edge, and that just gives you a wider activation time and a little bit more leniency with how soon you need to use Eager Edge after equipping the sword.
Well, y'all, this is the final list. The purpose of this particular tiering system essentially is to say, for your weapons in tier 4, all the ones in tier 3 do their jobs but better. Same thing with tier 2. Everything in tier 2 does tier 3's jobs but better, and everything in tier 1 does everything in tiers 2 jobs but better, with a couple of exceptions. Obviously, guns have different gun feels. Something like Duma Chelchis in tier 3 is a very unique gun that really doesn't have any readily available replacements in tier 2 and tier 3. However, it's still not a particularly good gun. Same thing with Nations of Beasts, and in tier 4 specifically, something like Word of Crota or Optative. Those are pretty unique guns that don't really have replacements. I mean, I guess you could say Ikelos, but Word of Crota and Ikelos, even though they're both Void 180s, they feel different enough where it makes sense to just have at least one of them. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't collect these weapons. I say that this is basically a priority list where by the time Final Shape comes out, you should try to have everything in tier 1 done. And once you have everything in tier 1 done, if you're deciding, oh, what should I use my Deep Sight Harmonizers on next? Oh, all the weapons in tier 2, so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to add a link to this list in the description. I posted it on the Tier Maker website. If anybody wants to do their own, make their own, please feel free to let me know what you agree with, let me know what you disagree with, and besides that, I hope each and every single one of you enjoyed watching this video. It's almost an hour of me just straight yapping, so I'm going to cut it off here, and y'all take it easy. Have a great day. See you next time.